History sometimes begins with a fight that looks completely hopeless. Our story takes place on April 9th, 1388, high in the Swiss Alps in a narrow valley called Glarus. The mountains tower above the villages, snow still clings to the slopes, and cold spring air moves through the valley floor. It is quiet in the early morning, but that silence is about to break. Marching toward the village of Näfels is an army from the Duchy of Austria, ruled by the powerful House of Habsburg. Their goal is simple: crush the rebellious Swiss forces in the valley and bring the region firmly back under Habsburg control. On paper, the outcome should be obvious. The Austrian force numbers roughly 5,000 men. These soldiers are equipped with armor, weapons, and the confidence that comes from serving one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe. They are led by Count Donat von Toggenburg and the knight Peter von Thorberg. This is not a small raiding party. It is a full military force marching into the valley to reassert authority. Waiting for them are the defenders of Glarus, and there are not many of them. The Swiss force consists of only a few hundred men from the canton of Glarus, supported by a handful of allies from the cantons of Schwyz and Uri. At most, there are around 400 fighters prepared to face the incoming army. These men are farmers, villagers, and local militia. They know the mountains intimately, but even that knowledge cannot change the brutal math of the situation. 5,000 soldiers against a few hundred defenders. It is the kind of imbalance that usually ends in disaster. To understand why this battle even happened, we need to look at the wider struggle between the Swiss Confederacy and the Habsburg dynasty during the 14th century. For decades, the Habsburg rulers of Austria had tried to maintain control over territories in the Swiss Alps. These valleys were strategically valuable. They contained important mountain passes and trade routes that connected northern and southern Europe. Controlling them meant controlling movement through the Alps. But the local communities did not always welcome outside rule. Over time, several alpine regions began forming alliances with one another. These alliances eventually became known as the Old Swiss Confederacy. The Confederation was not yet a nation in the sense. It was a defensive partnership between independent communities that had agreed to help each other resist foreign domination. Glarus was one of the places caught in the middle of this struggle. Just a few years earlier, in 1386, the Swiss had already defeated a Habsburg army at the famous Battle of Sempach. That defeat was a major blow to Habsburg authority in the region. After Sempach, Swiss forces captured the Habsburg-controlled village of Wiesen along Lake Walensee. Then things escalated even further. In 1387, the people of Glarus rose up against Habsburg rule and destroyed Burg Windegg, a fortress symbolizing Austrian control. Shortly afterward, the Valley Council of Glarus declared that it was free from Habsburg authority. That declaration did not sit well with the Austrians. In response, the Habsburg leadership prepared a new military campaign. Their goal was to isolate Glarus and crush the rebellion before it spread further. In February of 1388, Austrian forces struck the village of Wiesen during the night and drove out the Swiss defenders. Then, in early April, two Austrian armies moved into position to trap Glarus from different directions. The main force, about 5,000 soldiers strong, marched directly toward Näfels. A second column of around 1,500 troops advanced through a nearby mountain pass known as the Kerenzerberg. The plan was straightforward: trap the valley, overwhelm the defenders, and restore Habsburg rule. When April 9th arrived, the Austrian army reached the defensive barriers near Näfels. These barriers were known as aletzi, a type of fortification built across a narrow point in the valley to block an advancing army. The Swiss defenders tried to hold their ground, but the Austrians pushed through. The attacking force broke the defensive line and forced the Swiss fighters to retreat uphill toward the surrounding slopes. From the perspective of the Austrian commanders, the battle already looked like a victory. The defenders were withdrawing. The road into the valley lay open, and this is where the situation began to change. Instead of staying in tight formation, many Austrian soldiers began spreading out across the valley floor. Some entered nearby villages, others searched farms and homes for supplies or valuables. Looting after a successful advance was not unusual in medieval warfare. Soldiers often expected it as part of their reward, But that decision came with a price, because the Swiss had not truly abandoned the fight. They had simply moved to better ground. High above the valley floor, the Swiss fighters regrouped in the snow-covered slopes and fog that clung to the mountains. From that position, they could see the scattered Austrian troops below. The larger army had lost its discipline and its tight formation, and that is exactly what the Swiss had been waiting for. At the right moment, the defenders launched their counterattack. They charged down from the hills through snow and fog, descending rapidly onto the valley floor. The Austrian soldiers who had been looting farms or wandering away from their units suddenly found themselves under attack from multiple directions. The element of surprise was devastating. Instead of facing a single organized enemy line, the Austrians were confronted with fast-moving fighters striking from the slopes above. Confusion spread quickly through their ranks. Men began shouting orders and counter-orders. Units tried to regroup, but many were already separated from their commanders. And once confusion begins in battle, it spreads fast. Soon the Austrian soldiers were retreating. The main escape route led toward a bridge crossing the nearby Maag River, sometimes called the Weser Linth. Hundreds of soldiers rushed toward that bridge at the same time. Too many. The structure could not handle the sudden weight and pressure. The bridge collapsed. The large numbers of fleeing soldiers fell into the cold, rushing water below. Armor and heavy equipment made escape nearly impossible for many of them. Some drowned in the river, while others were cut down during the chaotic retreat. Meanwhile, the second Austrian column, advancing through the mountain pass, saw the disaster unfolding and chose to withdraw rather than join the fight. By the time the battle ended, the outcome was astonishing. The Swiss had lost around 54 men. The Austrian casualties were far higher. Historical estimates vary, but several hundred soldiers died, and some accounts suggest that as many as 1,700 Austrian troops were killed during the fighting and the collapse of the bridge. And remember the numbers we started with. The Swiss force had been outnumbered roughly 16 to 1, yet the smaller army had won. The victory at Näfels changed the future of the region. In 1389, a peace agreement was signed in Vienna that effectively recognized the territories the Swiss Confederacy had captured during the conflict. Glarus remained free from Habsburg control. Over time, victories like this helped strengthen the alliances that would eventually form modern Switzerland. The memory of the battle did not fade. In fact, it became part of local tradition. Each year, the people of Glarus hold a pilgrimage known as the Näfelser Fahrt. Participants travel to the battlefield to remember those who fought there in 1388. The event usually takes place on the first Thursday of April and has continued for centuries. It serves as a reminder that history does not always favor the largest army or the most powerful ruler. Sometimes it favors the people who know their land, who understand the terrain, and who are willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Because in the mountains, numbers alone do not guarantee victory. And sometimes the smallest force on the battlefield ends up writing the biggest chapter in history. So here's the question I would love to hear your thoughts on. Do you think the Swiss victory at the Battle of Näfels was mostly the result of courage and determination, or was it the clever use of terrain and timing that truly decided the outcome? Let me know what you think in the comments.